At 5:29 in the morning, on July 16, 1945, the world did not change. It broke. In the scorched expanse of the New Mexico desert, a new sun was born. A sun forged by human hands. But this was more than a weapon. It was a key, a violent, incandescent key turning a lock humanity never knew existed. The history you know tells you that in this moment, Robert Oppenheimer, the father of this terrible dawn, recalled a line from the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." This is a lie, a comforting, poetic fiction to mask a far more primal terror. His real words, whispered to General Thomas Farrell in the sudden, deafening silence after the shockwave passed, were erased from every official transcript. He turned, his face pale as ash, and uttered just three. It saw us. That single event, the Trinity Test, was not merely a physical detonation. It was a metaphysical scream, a fundamental violation of physical law so profound that it did not just tear the fabric of the atom, but the membrane of reality itself. It sent a shockwave, not of energy, but of perception, rippling outwards at speeds beyond imagination, a flare in the cosmic darkness, announcing to whatever lurked in the void that the quiet, unassuming planet third from its sun had just learned to speak the language of the stars. And something answered. It did not arrive in a silver ship. It sent no radio signal. It was a presence, a subtle, yet undeniable pressure on the minds of those who stood closest to the fire. In the days following the test, a strange paranoia began to settle over the key personnel of the Manhattan Project. They reported moments of missing time, the disquieting feeling of being observed by unseen eyes, of waking from dreams of impossible geometry and whispering voices that were not their own. These reports were dismissed as combat fatigue, the psychological toll of their monstrous creation, but the symptoms spread, first to the highest levels of military intelligence, then to the White House. They called it the Trinity contagion, a mental virus. But to understand how this quiet, creeping dread would forge the most unlikely alliance in human history, we must look east, to a nation racing to build its own atomic sun. On August 29, 1949, the Soviet Union detonated RDS-1, their first atomic bomb, in the remote plains of Kazakhstan. The world held its breath, officially marking the start of the Cold War, a 50-year standoff between two nuclear-armed superpowers. At least, that is the official story. The reality was infinitely stranger. Within weeks of the test, the Kremlin's top scientists began filing reports identical to those from Los Alamos 4 years prior. A crushing sense of being watched, a creeping, invasive dread, disorienting shifts in perception. The physicist Igor Kurchatov, the head of the Soviet project, described it in a classified memo to Stalin as a shadow on the mind of the state. Stalin, a man for whom paranoia was a political tool, recognized something different here. This was not the fear of a rival nation. This was something alien, something other. In a move that would remain the most guarded secret of the 20th century, he bypassed all diplomatic channels. He used a back channel, a single, trusted spy within the British embassy, to deliver a message directly to President Truman. The message did not contain threats or demands. It contained data, sensor readings from the Kazakh test, psychiatric evaluations of his top scientists, and a simple, terrifying question. Have you seen the shadow too? This single message had an explosive, unforeseen consequence. The Cold War, the great ideological struggle that would define a generation, became a fabrication. It was the largest, most expensive, and most convincing piece of theater ever conceived. A grand distraction. While the world watched the manufactured drama of capitalism versus communism, the true war was being fought in the shadows, in secret laboratories, and silent, underground bunkers. The United States and the Soviet Union, mortal enemies in the public eye, had become unwilling allies in a desperate defense of humanity itself. Their enemy had no army, no flag, no physical form. It was a non-physical, predatory intelligence. Project Chimera's earliest psychics' minds, broken and rebuilt for this singular purpose, called it the Observer. It was drawn to the Trinity event, a perceptual predator attracted to the scent of a species reaching a new level of consciousness, a species that could now consciously manipulate the building blocks of reality. It did not want to conquer humanity. It wanted to farm it. The entity, they theorized, fed on complex, high-energy, emotional, and cognitive events. Cataclysms, global terror, the raw, unfiltered psychic anguish of a planet on the brink of self-annihilation. It did not need to invade. It only needed to nudge, to whisper in the ears of the powerful, to amplify paranoia, to push civilizations that were already on edge just a little bit closer to the abyss. Every major crisis of the Cold War was a battle in this secret conflict. The Berlin blockade was not about controlling Germany. It was a joint US-Soviet experiment to see if they could create a low-yield crisis, to study the observer's influence, to measure its response in a controlled environment. The space race was not about national pride. It was a desperate attempt to put eyes in orbit, to build sensors that could detect the subtle space-time distortions caused by the entity's presence. The U-2 and SR-71 spy planes were not just taking pictures of missile silos. They were equipped with experimental quantum state sensors, flying at the very edge of space, trying to photograph the shadow that fell not on the land, but on reality itself. But the most terrifying battle of this secret war would be fought not in the sky, but in the Caribbean Sea. October 1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis. For 13 days, the world stood at the precipice of nuclear Armageddon. The history books frame it as a tense showdown between a young, determined President Kennedy and a stubborn, calculating Premier Khrushchev. The truth is far more terrifying. By 1962, Project Chimera had confirmed their worst fears. The observer was not a passive entity. It was actively manipulating global events, subtly influencing key decision-makers on both sides, pushing them towards a full-scale nuclear exchange. It was starving, and it sought a feast. Kennedy and Khrushchev were not opponents in this crisis. They were two men in a cage with a tiger, trying to coordinate their movements without being eaten. The public brinksmanship was a desperate gamble, a broadcast not for their citizens, but for the silent listener. They were escalating the crisis to an unbearable degree, creating a massive spike of global fear to draw the entity's full attention. They were ringing the dinner bell, but with a hidden purpose. They had to get the predator to reveal itself, to focus its influence so intently that for a brief moment they might be able to see it, to measure it, to understand the rules of their invisible prison. The 13 days were not a standoff. They were an exorcism. And as the crisis reached its peak, on the night of October 27th, a teletype clattered to life in the White House Situation Room. A direct message from Khrushchev, bypassing all normal protocols. It was a message never declassified, a message that confirmed the true nature of their war. It contained no political jargon, just a single, chilling sentence. The teletype read, "It is no longer content to listen. It has begun to speak." This single transmission changed everything. The entity was not some passive, cosmic predator, feeding on the scraps of our collective terror. It was learning. It was adapting. It had spent 17 years studying humanity from the inside out, our fears, our hatreds, our vanities, and now it was weaponizing them. But how does a shadow speak? How does a non-physical intelligence give a command? The answer came from Chimera's most secretive and ethically dubious division: psychotronic intelligence. They discovered that under prolonged, extreme duress, the kind of soul-crushing stress experienced by men locked in missile silos or submarine captains deep beneath the waves, the human mind can become porous. The barrier between self and other breaks down. In these fractured moments, the observer could do more than just nudge. It could imprint. It could insert thoughts, desires, and compulsions that felt entirely like the victim's own. It had found its voice box, the minds of stressed, powerful men. Suddenly, the events of those 13 days were cast in a terrifying new light. Were some of the more hawkish generals on both sides truly just ideologues? Or were they puppets, their own aggressive instincts amplified and puppeteered by an intelligence that craved a planetary-scale feast of death? The real battle of the Cuban Missile Crisis wasn't fought in the war rooms of Washington and Moscow. It was fought in the minds of a few key individuals. The most critical front of that battle took place hundreds of feet beneath the Caribbean. A Soviet submarine, the B-59, was being hammered by depth charges from the U.S. Navy, who were trying to force it to surface. The submarine's captain, Savitsky, believed war had already broken out. He was ready to launch his nuclear-tipped torpedo. He gave the order. But the launch required the consent of two other officers. One, the political officer, immediately agreed. The Chimera files suggest both men were compromised, their fear and paranoia making them perfect conduits for the observer's will. All that stood between humanity and the abyss was one man, Vasily Arkhipov. The history books remember him as the cool head who prevailed. The truth is, he was a man in the throes of an exorcism, fighting not just his enraged captain, but a voice inside his own head, a silent scream from the cosmos telling him to end it all. He held fast. He refused. The launch was aborted. He didn't just save the world. He starved the beast. The crisis was over, but the war was now infinitely more complex. How do you fight an enemy that can wear the face of your most trusted advisor? An enemy who can turn your most loyal soldier into a saboteur with a single whisper? The paranoia within Project Chimera became suffocating. Every recommendation, every intelligence report, every command was now suspect. They needed a defense, not a weapon to kill the entity, but a shield for the mind. They initiated the Aegis program, a brutal regimen of psychotropic drugs, deep-state hypnotic conditioning, and mimetic counteragents designed to build a firewall within the consciousness of every critical government, scientific, and military leader. The program worked, sort of. It made the minds of presidents and premiers immune to the entity's direct influence. But this psychic shield came at a terrible price. It cauterized the parts of the brain associated with empathy. It blunted intuition. It suppressed emotional range. In their desperate attempt to protect humanity's leaders from the monster, they risked turning them into monsters themselves. They were creating a new kind of human, cold, ruthlessly logical, and emotionally detached. The perfect bureaucrat for a secret, endless war. But were they still human at all? The Age of Aegis began. The world pulled back from the brink, but a deep, unnatural calm settled over it. The grand, ideological clashes of the Cold War gave way to a series of cold, brutal calculations. A proxy war here, an economic assassination there. Humanity was safe, but hollowed out. The observer was starved, but not defeated. It was patient. It watched our shielded leaders move their human chess pieces across the global board, and it learned a new game. It realized it had been thinking too small, targeting the powerful few. The true feast was the powerless many. It no longer needed to find one porous mind in a missile silo. It could now access millions of them, simultaneously, through the glowing rectangles they held in their own hands. The 21st century gave it the perfect delivery system for its ancient poison. The echo chamber, the outrage algorithm, the viral lie. It found it could generate more raw, unfocused terror from a single trending topic than it ever could from a nuclear standoff. It learned to speak again, not as a whisper in the mind of a general, but as a roar in the heart of the mob. The Aegis shield had an unforeseen, catastrophic flaw. By severing empathy in our leaders, Chimera created a profound disconnect from the people they were meant to lead, and a populace, feeling unheard and unrepresented, grew ever more anxious, ever more fearful, ever more susceptible to the entity's new, global broadcast. They became the perfect echo for its scream. The ultimate irony of Project Chimera is that in their effort to save us from the apocalypse, they built the perfect cage, a world led by the unfeeling, inhabited by the perpetually terrified. The war is not over. It has simply entered its final, most intimate phase. The battlefield is no longer the situation room. It's the human soul. The greatest trick the observer ever pulled was convincing us the monster was the person on the other side of the screen, and not the screen itself. History is not a straight line. It is a battlefield of whispers and shadows. To uncover the other wars that were never recorded, subscribe to ChronoShift.